you for the day and for the beauty of it. We're thankful for all the blessings that you provide for us every day. We have so much to be thankful for and recognize that all good and perfect gifts come from your hand, and that you are unchanging in your love and compassion and willingness to provide what we need. And you've done that in so many ways, not only in the physical provisions that you make for us every day and your providence in the way that you care for us, but through the sacrifice of your Son and the hope that we have through his willingness to come and give himself on our behalf so that we could have forgiveness and be reconciled to you. Help us to appreciate the greatness of that gift that you've given to us and all of your gifts, and as a result to appreciate you even more, and to be willing to submit ourselves to you. We give thanks to you for your word and for all that it shows us about not only your nature, but how you would have us to live so that we could be with you one day, and pray that we will learn from it, and pray your blessings on our study tonight, that we will benefit from our time spent in looking at this book of Ecclesiastes that you in your wisdom and through your Spirit have left for us to be able to look into and to know more about life under the sun. We pray your blessings on our study, and pray your blessings on the other studies going on both here and in other places, that we all might be encouraged and built up to walk with you more faithfully as we seek that eternal home that you have provided for us. We are thankful for the church and for your wisdom in providing this wonderful relationship that not only is supposed to be a reflection of your relationship with your people, but is ultimately also good for us and provides so many blessings and benefits for us in this life. Help us to appreciate how in your wisdom you've given us this great relationship, and help us to utilize it in the ways that not only bring you glory, but will also be good for us and encourage us and help us in the struggles that we face here, and might equip us so that we can share you and your truth with other people. Please grant us wisdom and understanding in all the spiritual matters that you would have us to be focused in and on. Help us to have the compassion and patience that we need with not only one another as brethren, but with those who are outside and walking out of step with you. We pray that we would utilize opportunities that we might have to try to point them in the right direction, and ultimately in a better direction, yours. We pray for your forgiveness when we sin, and pray for your help as we battle daily against the struggles and temptations and frustrations and toils of this life. Help us not to grow distracted by the cares and worries of this life, this world, as we're engaged in the various activities that we have to be engaged in here under the sun. Help us to keep our focus on the things that really matter, and to put those things first as we do all of the other activities that are necessary here. Please be with all of those that we know of who have struggles with their health and with declining ability and movement and increased pain because of older age. Pray that you would help them and strengthen them, and be with those who are caring for them. Give them strength and patience and wisdom to know how best to help in those struggles. Please help us to seek out and to make good on opportunities that we might have in our day-to-day lives to be an encouragement to each other and a help to one another and to others who are outside. Help us to reflect your light and your glory in all that we do, and through that may we have opportunities to lead others to know you. We thank you so much for Jesus, and pray your blessings on us through his name. Amen. All right. Ecclesiastes 3, we were finishing up by talking about how the statement that says God tests us that we may see that we are but beasts or mere beasts or like animals is the way I put it in the questions. I don't think that's doing it a service to the text itself that says, at least in the English Standard Version, says that we're like beasts, or actually it doesn't say we are like beasts. It actually says God is testing them that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. So he doesn't say we're like beasts. He says we are but beasts. And so we were talking on Sunday morning about how that's true. What is that reflective of? What does that mean? And we kind of ended class there, so I wanted to go back and kind of reiterate those last little points and kind of start things rolling from that point. How are we but beasts? Based either on perhaps what you thought about as you read that statement or comments that were made Sunday morning. How are men but beasts? We are all but beasts.
It seems to reference mortality.
Okay.
As one of the common things that we share with animals in nature.
Okay. So we have life, and there's a sense in which we have the breath of life. It's interesting to note that both in the Greek and the Hebrew both, there are three words that have reference to the nature of man. There is flesh, and the various words that are translated both Hebrew and Greek for flesh. There is spirit, and there is a word that is very diversely translated. It's translated in places, a lot of places, especially older translations in the English, it's translated as soul. And so we sometimes are, I think, because of the translations themselves, are confused by what is actually being conveyed then in that particular passage. Because there's flesh, there's soul, and there's spirit. All three of those words are used with reference to mankind. And again, that's true in both of the original languages, whether you're talking Hebrew or Greek. They both have three different words: flesh, soul, and spirit. All three are used of men. Only two of them are used with reference to animals. That's the word for flesh and the word for soul. Because the word for soul actually would be better translated in English translations as life or the breath of life. In the sense that when God breathed into our nostrils, He breathed into us the breath of life. In other words, He animated the flesh. The body is just a body without God's animating it. A dog, for example, when it dies, loses its breath of life, its animation, but it's still, the physical body of the dog still lying there. And so it needs the breath of life to be alive. Mankind needs not only the breath of life, but because of the nature of the way God created us, we also have a spirit that is the portion of us or the aspect of us, the characteristics of us that are created in the image of God. And it is the thing that differentiates us from all of the other animals. And the reason why is in its full description, we are not but beasts. But from an external point of view, can you see in man anything different than what you see? And I'm not talking about actions. I mean, animals, all beasts and animals act in a variety of different ways. Some of which we look at and we say, well, that makes sense. And some of it we look at and we think that doesn't make any sense at all. But from an external point of view, does there appear to be, scientifically speaking, with what we can see and detect, would we Would we scientifically describe anything different between men and beasts? I mean, that's my take, is the answer would be no. All beasts, all animals have flesh. What do men have? We call it skin, but the reality is it's a covering, it's flesh. And Paul uses that argument in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, talking about the resurrection, that not all flesh is of the same flesh. It's not all the same type. The flesh of men looks different than, just throw out an example. Bird feathers. I mean, now, underneath the bird feathers, what does it have? But does its skin look like yours? Not especially. I mean, there are maybe similarities, but there are a lot of differences too. Come out with another example that's even perhaps more obvious. I mean, birds have a covering of feathers that makes them different from the way that our covering is. But what else? Oh, come on. All kinds of reptiles. Crocodile. Crocodile have skin? Crocodile skin look like your skin? Not so much. Every animal has skin, and different skins look different ways. Why does a fish Why does a fish have the flesh that it has? Do you think? I mean, well, I'm asking you to kind of draw conclusions now. Why did God, and I don't think we have to draw conclusions here because I think it's part of Paul's point in 1 Corinthians 15. Why does a fish's flesh differ from a man's flesh? Why does a bird's flesh differ from a man's flesh and from a fish's flesh? Why does a reptile's flesh differ from all... Liz is waiting for me to mess up back there with all this fish's flesh and man's flesh and so on and so forth. I just saw her smiling. But, I mean, so why are they all different?
Their environments.
Interesting that the designer of the universe would create them all with unique skin types, fleshes, that are suited for the various environments in which they live. Are there animals that live in hot, desert, dry climates that have skin that equips them better than our skin does? Absolutely. Fish live in a wet environment all the time, right? What is a fish out of water? If it's out for very long, it's dead. Because that's just the nature. Fish live in water. And so because they live in water, they have a special type of flesh that is designed to handle that. Penguins are designed in such a way that their flesh, along with their feather, I guess it's like feather, it's a feather type coating, protects them from what? Really cold weather. I mean, so cold that we would freeze to death. And yet they can be out there in it because God designed their flesh to be equipped for that. And so, but the point is, my skin's different than a crocodile's skin's different than a fish's skin. But it's still all what? It's still all skin. So even though it's all different, it's still all skin. And what's it designed to do? And let's not get too scientific. Let's just make this really simple. Skin is designed to keep what's inside, and what's outside. That's what skin does. I mean, that's its purpose. I mean, a major purpose. I know it's an overgeneralization. It's much more complex than that, but that's a simple statement. All flesh is designed to keep things that are inside, and things that are outside. That's what it does. And from that perspective, is my flesh any different than a fish's flesh? Is my flesh any different than a bird's flesh? Or a crocodile's? Or anything else? No, it's all designed with the same purpose in mind. They just live in different environments. And so what's outside is different enough that there needs to be a difference in the skin. But it's still all skin. And so from the fleshly perspective, we are but beasts. We're just like every other beast. We have skin. We're not, I mean, we may be unique, but we're not special in the sense that, I mean, skin ultimately is skin. That's what it does. Our skin just happens to equip us or protect us or provide for us in the environment in which we live. Now, the second aspect that is used for both man and beast is soul, which I said would be better translated as the breath of life, the idea of animation, because flesh is just this body. But without the breath of life, the animation, this body would just be a shell laying there doing nothing. It can't move, it couldn't breathe, it wouldn't function, and it wouldn't be very long before it decayed and went back to the dirt. So every man and woman has a soul or the breath of life. But again, that doesn't make us unique in consideration with beasts, because what does every dog have? It has the breath of life. Every crocodile, every bird, every fish, they all have the breath of life. And when they cease to have the breath of life, what happens? They're no longer alive, they're dead, and they will ultimately decay and return to the dust. They return to the dust. I mean, if you don't believe me, find a bird that's been killed by something in your backyard, maybe a stray cat, maybe another bird, and that bird lays there. If it lays there in the ground long enough after it's dead, what happens to it? It eventually decays to nothing. It goes back to the dirt. What would happen to me if I died and you left me laying out in the yard long enough? What would happen to my body? Exactly the same thing. From dust you came, and to dust you shall return, God said to man in the beginning. We're not unique in that sense. Everything that has flesh, everything that was created that has flesh, ultimately the body will decay if it's not animated and not alive. That's what happens to it. But the aspect of us that's unique, and the third side that differentiates us from the beast, is the spirit. What's the problem with the spirit? Can you see that I have within me the breath of life? You say, well, I can't see it. I mean, when you breathe, there's not really anything that comes out unless it's really cold outside and humid, and then your breath will sometimes, or the humidity from your breath will sometimes condense, and you'll see it in the form of steam. But otherwise, can you see the breath of life in me? Not in that sense, but how can you? I'm moving around and talking to you. That's a pretty good sign, right? I mean, whether or not you could do my vitals and find out that I have a pulse, and I'm actually exchanging oxygen in my lungs with the blood in my lungs that then carries it to my heart carries it to the other parts of my body to oxygenate them. I mean, you don't have to see all those processes to know that I have in me the breath of life, because I'm moving and I'm active. And so we can see that aspect. We see it in men, we see it in beasts. Flesh, we see it in men, we see it in beasts. How do we know that we have a spirit and that the animals don't? Yes, sir. Because God said so. Well, I mean, okay. Why should I take His word for it? I mean, I'm not being smart aleck, really. This is questions people would ask you. I don't even believe there is a God, so why would I take His word for it? We're just animals. That's just all it is. All there is to it. We've evolved from other animals, and we're still just animals. That whole study we did with Andrew for the last quarter is designed to give us, and hopefully to equip us to share with other people, the fact that there is a preponderance of evidence that suggests that there is a God, and that the Bible is unique and therefore can only be explained by the fact that it is His Word. And if we're going to talk about things that are unseen in this universe that exists, who better to know about it than the one who made it? And so God says we're unique. Now, are there senses in which we can see the uniqueness of mankind with any other beast? Yes, we talked about this in the last quarter too with Andrew. So there are ways to see some differentiating characteristics between mankind and the animal world. And ultimately, what every one of those things that we talked about are, in my opinion, they are evidence for the fact that man has a spirit, or at least has some aspect of his nature that is different from any other animal. God, in the Bible, calls it spirit. And I think in Hebrew it's the word ruach, and in the New Testament it is pneuma. And so spirit is that aspect of us that makes us different. And God says that we were created in His image. Is He flesh and blood? Is He mortal? No. And we do know that He's spirit. Jesus talks about that in multiple places, John 4 and other places. And so we've always just said it is the Spirit that is created in the image of God. And I do believe that's true, but I think that Spirit has a lot of characteristics that are explanations for the ways in which we are made in His image, that are beyond just the fact that we have a spirit. I mean, that is true. But from every other aspect, in just looking at life under the sun, it would appear that men are but beasts. And there's some sense in which that statement can be made definitively, because from a physical point of view, scientifically speaking, to use more modern terminology, scientifically speaking, we look like nothing more than beasts. So then he makes another statement in this connection. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down to the earth? Who knows that? And again, I think the natural way he expects us to hear this question being asked is, which one of you can look at the two and say whether the spirit of the man goes up and the spirit of the beast goes down to the earth? Who of you can make that determination?
Is he sort of saying in a way, we've got a saying, dead like Rover, dead all over.
Right.
You see a dead animal and it's like, well, there's no sign of its spirit anymore. It's just dead.
Right.
It just ceases to be. And from our perspective, when a person dies, it looks effectively the same way.
That's exactly right.
He's making a comparison that from this life's perspective, you don't know what happens.
Nope.
You don't know what's next.
No. And so from that perspective, and he's going to keep this theme going for really kind of a while. It kind of is the way chapter 4 starts. And again, these themes keep coming back around again. But the reality is, do we really, from an earthly perspective, have any advantage over the beasts? Okay, I mean, just from an earthly perspective, how could we say that we have an advantage over the beasts? I mean, just looking at it from here, life under the sun, and the nature of life, I would be more inclined to say that the reality is, in some ways, I think we have a disadvantage. Now, I would be inclined to say that because there are animals that I look at and I think I'd really like to be able to do that. That'd be really cool to be able to do that. And I also think about from the perspective of some animals, it seems like, I mean, for the most part, they live a fairly carefree life until they die. I mean, we're going to die too, so it's like, well, whatever. Cats have it pretty easy. We make fun of cats, but cats spend 80% of their life doing what? That doesn't sound so horrible. I mean, there's not a whole lot that can go wrong when you're sleeping. I mean, unless you sleep in the wrong place and somebody tramples you. But I mean, sleeping, there are times I'd like to sleep a lot more than I'm able to. And so there's some ways in which I look at it and I think, well, we're really smart and so we can improve our station and we can do all this stuff and we think of all that as advantages. But the reality is we get caught up in the rat race and all the things that have to be done and all the things that have to be taken care of. And it can become, from an earthly point of view, a draining thing. I mean, we call it a rat race for a reason, don't we? I mean, Is a rat race, is the terminology designed to make us think, oh, well, this is so much fun? No, I mean, it's designed to make us think. We get up in the morning, we go do all this stuff, and what do we have to look forward to when we go to bed? The next day, we're likely to do what? Rinse and repeat. There are days that gets really old. Rinsing and repeating gets really old. Now, if you're just an animal and you don't really care about advancing and accomplishing all this stuff, all you're really worried about is getting the next gazelle because you're hungry, and you accomplish that, then what do you get to do? Kind of lay back and do nothing. And so, in some ways I look at it and I think, well, far from having an advantage over the other beasts, there are some senses in which it's a disadvantage to be this smart and to have all these faculties that we have, and to be able to accomplish all the things that we do. Never mind the nonsense that people do with all of the intelligence that they have in creating things that are ultimately just going to destroy people's lives. And so all of the harm that's done by these people who are so smart and yet use that wisdom and intelligence for things that are less than helpful and make our lives more difficult. So anyway, just looking at it from the perspective of men and beasts from life under the sun, there doesn't seem to be any real distinction. There doesn't seem to be any real advantage. So who does know whether the spirit of the man goes up and the spirit of the beast goes to the ground or goes to the earth? Who knows that? God does. And so Solomon's not intending for us to look at this and say, well, who really knows what happens? Maybe all dogs really do go to heaven. That is not the point that he's making. His point that he's making is, if you're just looking at it as far as life under the sun, it doesn't appear that we have any great advantage. And in the end, you're going to die just like that dog down the street, or that bird flying through the air, or the crocodile who just ate the wildebeest. I mean, he looks pretty powerful because he killed the wildebeest, but the end result is, one of these days, he's going to die. Either something bigger is going to get him, or his life is just going to expire because he gets old and decays and runs out just like the rest of us, and then his body will go to nothing, and you're going to do the same thing. And from that perspective, just looking at it as life under the sun, there is no apparent advantage for us over any of the beasts. We are but beasts. So then he makes that statement again. So verse 22, I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? And he uses that phrase a lot too. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? Can you tell him? Can you tell him what's going to happen in the years to come? And I've had this conversation with multiple people and even thought it myself before. Sometimes I think we like to think, wouldn't it be nice if we knew what the future held? What's your answer to that? Lou's shaking her head no. What do you think? I mean, obviously there are aspects of that sound appealing, right? And if you were looking, if something happened in your life and you were going to have to make a move or change jobs, if you had a couple of different prospects in front of you and you could just look down the road and pull a Dr. Strange and run through all the scenarios and figure out how they were going to turn out. I mean, there's some aspects of that seem like they'd be really cool, right? But the problem is, if we could see the future and we really didn't get to negotiate which aspects we get to see, there are aspects of our future that we might choose not to do because the end result's pretty painful, right? I mean, that's just the reality. And here's the question. Do you think you really would do any better at making your choices if you thought you knew how the outcome was going to be, what the outcome was going to be, what was going to happen? make it worse. I mean, the reality is that some of the, as we've talked about numerous times, some of the greatest lessons in life are learned in some of the most horrific circumstances. I mean, that's just a fact. Some of the greatest strides in spiritual growth that we have as God's people take place in the trenches. That really shouldn't surprise us. And in the end, when we think about it, it really doesn't surprise us. But does that mean anybody really likes to be in the trenches? No. I mean, nobody likes to be in the trenches. And so if we knew all of those things beforehand, we would ultimately make a bigger mess of things than we already do. Because we would choose not to make choices and go in a certain direction because of what pain it was going to create and cause, and end up making a bigger mess in the choices that we did make. It's just the nature of who we are. And it's because we can't really see the outcome from the perspective of all the things that are gained through the struggles, and God can. So we're much better off not knowing and not having somebody tell us what's going to be after us, whether we're talking about after this moment, after this year, after this decade, or we're talking about after our lifetime. What's going to happen to all the stuff I leave behind, all the stuff that we've worked hard for? Nobody can tell us that. And so if you're living with the prospect of making a certain amount or possessing certain things so that you can leave those behind to someone who's going to do really great things with them, what is the problem with that? If that's the focus of your life and that is the sum total of who you are, what's going to happen in the end? You're going to accomplish all that, and then you are going to what? You're going to die. And you're going to leave it all behind, and I don't care how well you wish and what kind of provisions you make for it, it will be dealt with and will be used in whatever way the people left after you decide to use it. I mean, that's the fact, and you have no control over it. So here you poured your whole life, your entire existence, the sum total of who you are, into all of this work and all of this accomplishment, and then when you die, you leave it behind to somebody who may do really great things with it, and they may squander and waste it, and they might even use it for evil purposes, and you have no control over it whatsoever. And so Solomon's point throughout this whole book is, don't get so focused on life under the sun and all the things that it entails that you lose sight of what really matters. These things are all necessary. Working, the cares and worries of this life are all necessary because we live under the sun. But they are not who we are. They are ultimately the means by which God has, in His wisdom, decided that we will have a lot of the blessings of this life and enjoy a lot of the gifts that He is seeking for us. They're not to be had. I know, our society looks for get-rich-quick schemes. They want some easy fly-by-night kind of thing that's going to make them tons of money so they can just relax and just splurge and enjoy life. And the reality is, according to what we see in this particular text of Ecclesiastes, they wouldn't be satisfied anyway. They would have all kinds of other concerns and worries to deal with because they're seeking after the wrong things. The benefit is that for people of God, whether you have a little or whether you have a lot, what can you be? You can be content. Does that necessarily mean you're completely satisfied in the sense that you don't want for anything? You never want anything? No, that's not what it means at all. But whether you achieve that or not, you can still be content and still find joy and purpose in life, because our real purpose is what? In the end, the conclusion of the whole matter is Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole of mankind. This is the whole of man. That's what we're created for. And when we get that aspect of life right, God finds a way not only to provide what we need, God finds a way to give us peace and joy and satisfaction in all those things, whether it's a little or a lot. It doesn't matter. God finds a way to help us have peace and joy and some measure of satisfaction and accomplishment in those things. And so that's the key to all of this, is keeping our focus in the right place and seeing these things not just as a toil, a wearisome toil and vanity of vanities, but as the means for providing for us so that we can enjoy the gifts God wants for us to have in this life. And then, like I said, he kind of rolls into chapter 4 with some of the same kinds of thoughts, although perhaps from a little different perspective. Again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. So what's the point he's making in that text, in verses 1 and 2? He is looking at a specific class of people here. And maybe class is the wrong way to look at it, but a specific type of people. What is going on with the people that he is reflecting on the sadness and vanity of their lives? They're being oppressed. They're being oppressed. And the people that they're being oppressed by have what? They have all the power, which means they can do whatever they want to the people that they're oppressing. And there is no one to comfort them from the perspective of there's no one to step in and help them and deal with these people immediately from the perspective of life under the sun. And so the conclusion that he draws is what? As he thinks about all of that, I guess that was just verse 1. In verse 2, better is who? The person who's dead as opposed to the person who's alive. Remember, number 1, the context, life under the sun. Number 2, the immediate context, someone who's being oppressed. Why would someone who is dead be better than the one who is alive in that circumstance? Just from life under the sun. Because why? Okay, they're no longer being oppressed. I mean, forget what's actually happening to them. They're no longer being oppressed. So the powerful people are no longer abusing them. Does that sound better than the person who's still alive and being oppressed and abused? Yes. But he says there's one that's even better than both of them, which is who? The one who was never born at all, because he was never oppressed in the first place. So, and I mean, again, just looking at it in that context, and that's what's important for us to do, not only in this passage, but a lot of others. Look at it in the context. If we're talking about someone who's being oppressed by powerful people and being abused, who is better, the one being oppressed or the one that's dead and no longer being oppressed? The one that's dead. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I've got a choice between being oppressed and no longer being oppressed, I mean, I'm sure there could be oppression bad enough that even death would sound like a better thing. And for us as Christians, it ought to sound like a better thing in a lot of ways. But then the third category, if we're going to throw a third one in there, the one who was never born. Yeah, well, they never suffered at all. So from that perspective of life under the sun, these statements make sense. They're logical. Even though they may sound a little odd to us. Okay, so we're going to pick up there in 2a, talking about chapter 4, Sunday morning, Lord willing. And then, like I said, May 1st, May 8th are still available to anyone who might want to take those 2 classes. Thanks for the help tonight. Appreciate you.
mic's on now. We're going to be looking at the life of Abraham. And I don't know about you, but there's kind of the typical highlights from the life of Abraham that we tend to think about. If you had to write a quick summary, it might go something like this. Well, God calls Abraham from his home country. He makes promises to Abraham. You might include some of the interludes, maybe his dealings with Lot or the birth of Ishmael, those kind of things. But then Isaac is promised. Isaac is born to Abraham in his old age. And then, of course, the story that everyone knows is the testing of Abraham's faith when he's called to sacrifice Isaac. And, those are kind of the highlights. But there's a whole lot of details about Abraham's life that don't always make it into those stories that we often repeat. When you read the entire life of Abraham, you really get a different picture sometimes. And so I wanted to share some insights that I noted while doing these readings, and especially looking at the timing of Abraham's life. And by timing, I mean his age. Where in life was Abraham when a lot of these things happened? So we'll start in Genesis 12 with God calling Abraham. In verse 1, now the Lord said to Abram, he's Abram at this point, go out from your country, from your relatives and from your father's household to the land that I will show you. Then I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, so that you will exemplify divine blessing. I will bless those who bless you, but the one who treats you lightly I must curse, and all the families of the earth will bless one another by your name. So Abram left, just as the Lord had told him to do, and Lot went with him. Now Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. So for this first point, Abraham was 75 years old when he left his home country. Now, it's worth acknowledging that Abraham lives to be 175. I have some theories of my own when it comes to, well, I don't know if they're my own, but I have some thoughts about the prolonged lifespan of some of the early biblical characters. That's not really the point I want to dwell on. But I don't know what 75 looks like when you live to be 175. Did Abraham's life scale linearly compared to ours, in which case, he's about middle-aged, or a little less than middle-aged if he's 75. So maybe we think, well, maybe Abraham looks like a man in his late 30s or early 40s. I don't know, is that middle-aged? Maybe that's middle-aged now. I don't know, though, because I seem to think that 75 is a mature age, even at that time. The reason I think that is because later on in Genesis, when Sarai gives Hagar to Abraham and says, I'm not going to have an heir, I'm not going to have a child, you need to take Hagar as your concubine, Sarah is 75 when she does that. That's 10 years after Abraham moves into the land. So Sarai at 75 thinks, I'm past childbearing years, there's no more chance that I'm going to have a child. So I'm inclined to think that 75 is still a mature age, even for people living in Genesis. That's just my theory there. But the point from this, the lesson that I want to draw from this, is that people can come to God's call at any point in their life. We have nothing recorded about Abraham's life for the first 75 years. We don't know anything about his life in Haran, in the household of his family. We don't know anything about that. It's not important to the story. It doesn't bear being recorded to the writer of Genesis. Did Abraham have a belief in God? Was he a worshiper of God? We don't know. We don't really know what Abraham's relationship with God was like for those first 75 years. The point is that when God called to Abraham at 75, get out of your home country and go to a new country, Abraham listened. He heeded that call even at a mature age in his life. Well, the next point I want to look at is the idea of what was Abraham like when he was called? Abram, when he was called. People are far from perfect when God calls them. In the same chapter in Genesis 12, we only have to get down to verse 11, and there's a famine in the land. So Abram and Sarai, they go to Egypt. And in verse 11, as he approached Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, "Look, I know that you are a beautiful woman. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but keep you alive. So tell them you are my sister, so that it may go well for me because of you, and my life may be spared on account of you." So here we see the first example of Abram really bending to fear. There are many occasions in Abram's life, in the record we have of him, where he does not behave like someone who trusts in God. We treat Abraham like, the faith of Abraham. If there's one defining feature of Abraham, it's his faith. He's held up as this beacon of faith. Well, this isn't the actions of a faithful individual. This isn't the action of someone who has this undying, unwavering trust. He's afraid for his life, and so he conjures up a lie. Say you're my sister. We learn later that that was a half-truth. Sneaky Abram thought he could get away with a half-truth. It didn't help. We know how the story goes. That didn't work out well for him. Pharaoh wasn't going to kill Abram, and he says, you should have just told me the truth, man. Genesis 15. Okay, so Abram learns his lesson, right? Genesis 15, we see a mention where God says in verse 1, fear not, Abram, I am your shield and the one who will reward you in great abundance. But Abram said, O sovereign Lord, what will you give me since I continue to be childless, and my heir is Eliezer of Damascus? Abram added, since you have not given me a descendant, then look, one born in my house will be my heir. So here Abram is still concluding that, well, somebody else, someone that lives in his camp, one of the men of his camp, he's going to have to be his heir. He's going to have to fulfill that role because I don't have a son. He's not speaking as one who really trusts that an heir is coming. Genesis 16. This pattern continues. In Genesis 16, this is the account of Sarai at now age 75. Ishmael's born. Abraham's 10 years older than Sarai. The dates are actually very well preserved in the life of Abram, is what I found. That's what made this lesson interesting to me, is that the ages are very well recorded. In chapter 16, now Sarai, Abram's wife, had not given birth to any children, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, since the Lord has prevented me from having children, have sexual relations with my servant. Perhaps I can have a family by her. And Abram did what Sarai told him. So after Abram had lived in Canaan for 10 years, Sarai, Abram's wife, gave Hagar, her Egyptian servant, to her husband to be his wife. So here still, Abraham, after being told by God a chapter earlier, now, the time span of that chapter may have been a few years. He's lived in the land 10 years is what's recorded here. But Abram decides, well, I'm going to try another way to produce an heir. I'm still not acting as though I really trust that heir is going to come through Sarai. So Ishmael's born. Abraham's 86 years old when Ishmael's born. He was 75 when he left home. It's only been 10 years. He's 86, and now he has Ishmael. But that's not God's plan. That's not the way God's going to fulfill this promise. In Genesis 17 and verse 17, still, Abraham thinks he can't have an heir through Sarah. He's now Abraham. He's been renamed. Then Abraham bowed down with his face to the ground, and he laughed as he said to himself, can a son be born to a man who is 100 years old? So about 15 more years has passed. God's still promising this son. He's 100 years old. Sarah's 90. Can Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael may live before you. And God said, no, Sarah, your wife, is going to bear you a son, and you will name him Isaac. I will confirm my covenant with him as a perpetual covenant for his descendants after him. So, still, Abraham now thinks that he can't have an heir by Sarah. God has told him now multiple times how this is going to be, and he's not acting in that kind of trust. We're told in chapter 15, verse 6, by the way, that Abraham believed, but he's still hedging his bets. He's still acting with this lack of confidence. And then finally, Genesis 20. Isaac's not been born yet, at least as long as this is recorded chronologically. It's not clear if this story is exactly chronological, this chapter. But in Genesis 20, he does the wife thing again. He goes to Negev, and there's the king of Negev, Abimelech, and they're going there, and Abraham says to Sarah, or Abraham says about his wife in verse 2, Sarah, she's my sister. So Abimelech, the king, sent for Sarah and took her. But God appeared to Abimelech, and the same thing with Pharaoh, he does it again with Abimelech. He's 100 years old now. It's been 25 years since he did this the first time, and he's still doing this again. By the way, Sarah's 90 at this point. It made me wonder, what was it with the kings around this time period where they, 75, 90-year-old women are still, very, very desirable for a wife, apparently. Sarah was very good looking into her old age, apparently, because Abraham said so. But people are far from perfect when God calls them. All of these examples, they just stand to show us that Abraham had a rough time with it sometimes. And Abraham really had a hard time being just this, I think, this perfect picture that we create of him where, it's just, no matter what you say, Lord, I know you're going to do it. I know it's going to happen the way you say it's going to happen. He didn't act like it if he said that. Another lesson I wanted to draw from Abraham's life. God feeds us more understanding and greater expectations as we come to know him better. Think about this. When we first are introduced to Abram, what's God's command? What's his call? Get out of your country. Go to this place. Go to Canaan, where this will be your land. And he does say that I will bring about nations through you. But that's the original calling of Abram. Later on, we have some more of those promises later on. God comes to Abram again and gives some promises of the nations that are going to come through him. He also promises the Messiah, the one who will bless the world through your lineage. So more information, more knowledge and understanding is given to Abraham as he goes on. Then, in chapter 17, you have circumcision being added as a sign of the covenant that Abraham, that's when Abraham gets his name changed, is when God institutes, you and your household and your sons, you must be circumcised. He was 99 years old when God implemented that. Why didn't God do that on day one? Why didn't God do that when he was 75? God unfolds the information and the understanding as Abraham matures and as he's able to understand more about who God is. In chapter 18 of Genesis, we have this amazing conversation. Abraham has just hosted the men of God. They're angels. There's different descriptions of exactly who they are. They tell him that Isaac's going to be born to him, and then they go on to Sodom and Gomorrah. They're going to go investigate the city. But the Lord stays there. And in verse 23 of chapter 18, so the two men turned, they headed towards Sodom, but Abraham was still standing before the Lord. And I just picture this conversation as, Abraham's, maybe he's being quiet, or I don't know, he kind of comes up beside God and he just says, in verse 23, Abraham approached and said, will you sweep away the godly along with the wicked? What if there's 50 godly people in the city? Will you really wipe it out and not spare the place for the sake? Sorry, lost my place there for a second. Will you really wipe it out and not spare the place for the sake of 50 godly people who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the godly with the wicked, treating the godly and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will you not judge of the whole earth? Will not the judge of the whole earth do what is right? Abraham has this really intimate conversation with God where he's even able to kind of bargain for the souls in Sodom and Gomorrah and appeal to God because of the nature of God that he understands. I know you're a righteous judge. I know that you're not going to destroy the good people who might be there. The conversation goes on, and Abraham is so respectful and wants to show his respect to God, but still wants to make this appeal. Down in verse 32, finally Abraham said, "May the Lord not be angry with me so that I may speak just once more. What if 10 are found there?" And God replied, "I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. And then God went on his way when he had finished speaking with Abraham. Now we know from the rest of Genesis there are not 10 souls, there are 4 who are spared from the destruction of Sodom, but God spares them. He still spares those souls, he just doesn't spare the city. He tells them, you need to get out because the city's not going to be spared. And one of those 3 looks back, so really 3 souls are spared from the destruction. And are any of the souls spared? It's really hard to say from the rest of the story, but that's for another day. God feeds us more intimate knowledge of him the longer we get to know him and the more we get to know him. Well, then we get to the test in Genesis 22. We all know the story of God saying, sacrifice your son, your only son, the one that I've been promising to you, offer him as a burnt offering. No explanation. And, doesn't this happen sometimes where, Abraham has been through so much, and Abraham must think, I've made such progress, in terms of the faith that I have in God, the way God's blessed me. I mean, by this point, Abraham has gone to war. He's defeated rival kings in the area. He's rescued members of his family. He's got hundreds of people in his camp who all look up to him as their leader. One of the kings in the area calls Abraham Prince of the Hebrews. Abraham is basically like a little mini monarch in the area. He's gotten pretty successful. And now, after all that, suddenly completely the unexpected. But we know that Abraham does it. And what I want us to focus on is in chapter 22, verse 12. At the very end, Abraham's about to kill Isaac. God, of course, calls out, Abraham, stop, here I am. Do not harm the boy, he says in verse 12. The angel said, do not do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God because you did not withhold your son, your only son, from me. And that's something that I drew from this and the lesson I wanted to draw here. The real test was not, oh, are you going to kill your son and sacrifice him for me? This wasn't God tugging Abraham back and forth and jerking on his leash, making life difficult for him, or just manipulating him like some kind of cruel mastermind. The test was, are you going to acknowledge that Isaac is mine? Isaac is not Abraham's. Isaac is God's. That which is a burnt offering is that which you give to God. A sacrifice, an offering, is you saying, God, this belongs to you. So by Abraham being willing to go through with that sacrifice, Abraham is willing to say, even though this is my son that you promised me, Isaac belongs to you. Isaac belongs to God because God fulfilled his promise in giving Isaac to me. So a lot of maturing in the 25 years since Abraham left home to the point that he's 100. I forget how old Isaac is. I think he's maybe in his early teens or childhood years at this point. It's not entirely clear, for at least here along. So it could be 25 to 50 years, maybe. A lot of maturing in that amount of time, but also a lot of failures, a lot of issues. Well, now let's end, like Josh did. Let's go to the New Testament, Hebrews chapter 11. Because like Samson, Abraham's got a mention here too. Abraham has quite a mention, actually, in Hebrews chapter 11. It starts in verse 8 and it goes through verse 19. I just want to read this for us, and then we'll look at a quick passage in Galatians as well. Hebrews 11:8. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he would later receive as an inheritance. And he went out without understanding where he was going, at 75. By faith, he lived as a foreigner in the promised land, as though it was a foreign country, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, who were fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking to a city with firm foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, even though Sarah herself was barren and he was too old, he received the ability to procreate because he had regarded the one who had given the promise to be trustworthy. So, in fact, children were fathered by one man, and this one as good as dead, like the numbers of the star in the sky, and like the innumerable grains of sand on the seashore were his descendants. These all died in faith without receiving the signs promised, the things promised, but they saw them in the distance and welcomed them and acknowledged that they were strangers and foreigners on the earth. For those who speak in such a way make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. In fact, if they had been thinking of the land that they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they aspire to a better land, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. He had received the promises, yet he was ready to offer up his only son. God had told him, through Isaac, descendants will carry on your name. And he reasoned that God could even raise him from the dead, and in a sense, he received him back from there. So Hebrews praises Abraham for his faith, and rightfully so. I don't want to discredit that the faith of Abraham, it's legendary for a reason. But lest we turn him into just the legend, we remember that Abraham had a lot of growing to do to get there, even as a 75, 85, and 100-year-old man. The faith that he had built That faith had to be built. Abraham had to make those mistakes to see that faith realized. Well, one more passage I'll leave you with, Galatians chapter 3, verses 2 through 9. Galatians 3, verse 2. The only thing I want to learn from you is this. Did you receive the Spirit by doing works of the law, or by believing what you heard? Are you so foolish? Although you began with the Spirit, are you now trying to finish through human effort? Have you suffered so many things for nothing, if indeed it was for nothing? Does God then give you the Spirit and work miracles among you by your doing the works of the law, or by your believing what you heard? Just as Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, so then understand that those who believe are the sons of Abraham. And the Scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, proclaimed the gospel to Abraham ahead of time, saying, all the nations will be blessed in you. So then, those who believe are blessed, along with Abraham, the believer. Do you believe that God is going to make good on his promises for you? When we are called to come to God, we're not called in our final form. We're not called in our final state. And we are probably going to fail and trip and misstep along the way. But when Abraham was called at 75, he still believed. He believed enough to answer that call when he did. It can happen at any time in our lives. Some of us answered the call of God and felt that call from God when we were young. And we believed and we obeyed when we were early in our lives. Some of us much later. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when you answer God's call. What matters is that you believe and that you do it. And even though Abraham thought, well, maybe I can try it this way, and that didn't work, and well, maybe I can try through Ishmael, and that didn't work, and well, maybe I'm going to get killed, so I need to lie again and pretend like she's my sister again, and that didn't work. He messed up. Abraham got it wrong a lot. But he kept on believing even after he did mess up. He kept on coming back to that belief that he was going to trust God. So that even at the ultimate test, Abraham knew everything belongs to God, everything is his, and he will fulfill his promises. I think that's what I was able to pull from the story of Abraham when I read it this time. And the life of Abraham being so much more than just the call, the promise, and Isaac. There's so many other things in between that really give a fuller picture of a life of a man who he had to figure it out, and it took a long time, but he still did. Have you figured it out? We haven't figured it out. But have you figured out what you need to do when it comes to answering the call of God? I hope you have. If we can help anyone in any way this evening, if you need to become a Christian, to be baptized and start your walk with God, I don't know if we have any this evening who haven't answered that call, but you have the chance to. Whether you're 75 or 7, doesn't matter. If you believe and if you understand that belief, or if we can help anyone with requests for prayers or recommitment to God, whatever you need, let us help you. Let us help one another as a family while we stand and as we sing.
Would you live for Jesus and be always pure and good? Would you walk with him within the narrow road? Would you have him bear your burden, carry all your load? Let him have his way with thee. His power can make you what you ought to
Thank you, Andrew, for those great words. It's good to see everyone out tonight. It's good to be together as a family, as always. Just a couple of quick announcements before Eric leads us in prayer. We want to continue to remember Ken Graham and Paulette with their recovery from their recent surgeries. And Terry Graham, we want to remember him. He's down in the back this evening, but want to remember him with his upcoming heart procedures. Chip is sick this evening, but we're thankful for his recommitment to God and returning to our family here. So praise God for that. Michael Lockmiller, he is a nephew of Gail's and an elder at Pekin. He was diagnosed recently with prostate cancer. So we want to remember Michael. And then the new directory is back on the table, and the new work schedules for May are also back there. Aaron and Zach are in Las Vegas. They should be back tomorrow evening, I believe. I want to remember them for safe travels. The young persons group, Strong Together in Our Youth, will be meeting on Friday at Andrew and Addie's house, so see them for details. And then also the ladies' Bible study every Tuesday at 1 p.m. at Addie's, and they're studying Titus. So if you would like to avail yourself to that. I think that's it. Lawn care, John Sandusky's on for this. And before Eric leads us in prayer, Brace has something to say for us.
For those who are not yet aware, we got some news this morning that Sister Lori Woodall has been diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer. Most of those of us who have been here for a length of time know the Woodalls, Lori and Heather now Wells, and her husband Lawrence, their son Deacon and daughter Phoebe, and then John and Tina Woodall and their daughters Emma and Molly. And so Lori's plan at this point with the diagnosis is to undergo an immunochemotherapy treatment in an attempt to give her a little bit longer, but she said if it becomes such that she can't really enjoy a quality of life with her family, then she'll probably just choose quality of life for as long as that will allow her to continue on. And Angie told me some information that I didn't know this morning, and that is that essentially without any treatment, she's been given a prognosis of about 2 to 3 months. So Lori lost her husband Bobby, and of course John and Heather lost their dad, Bobby, not all that long ago. I mean, it's been over a year at this point, I think, slightly over a year. But the prognosis of them facing losing their mother is especially difficult, I'm sure. I know it is on Heather, because Ashley and Heather were talking, and I can imagine, knowing John and the relationship he's had with his mom, that will be especially hard for him. So prayers for the family would be appreciated. Prayers for Lori as she goes through the treatment. And Angie mentioned something else that I think we should all be praying for, and that is opportunities to encourage them and help them in what is an especially sensitive time that may open up some opportunities for reaching them and their relationship with the Lord, and maybe with their relationship with us as his family and theirs. Many of us still consider the Woodalls part of our family. I mean, they were here for years, and they're not here anymore, but that doesn't change the nature of the affection that we feel for them. And so invite you to pray for them, for God's help for them, whatever that may entail and whatever that might look like, and then pray for opportunities to perhaps be of help and encouragement to them as well. So I just wanted to share that information. Like I said, I don't know who all knew. I know a few of us did, but I know they would appreciate all the prayers they can get. So, and by the way, that's where Ashley and Maddie are tonight. Ashley is over there providing some emotional support for Heather, and Heather's daughter specifically asked if Maddie would be able to come with her, and so that's where both of them went tonight, was over to Lakeview to provide some emotional support as that announcement gets made over there. So.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for all that you blessed us with. We'd ask that you would be with the ones that were mentioned of finding out they had cancer. We'd ask that you would be with the doctors and nurses, give them a portion of health, if it be thy will. Be with us to help hold them up and do anything that we can for them in this difficult time. We'd ask that you would be with the other members that were mentioned as being sick and those that are going to have procedures. Be with those doctors and nurses that are tending to them as well. Give them a better report of health, if it be thy will. Ask that you be with the ones that are traveling. Give them a safe journey back home. Be with those that are sick and give them a portion of health, if it be thy will. We'd ask that you would go with us as we depart. Guide, guard, and direct us. Give us a home with thee, if we're found faithful until the end. In Jesus Christ we pray. Amen.